Welcome to the Savage World's GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. We're on social media. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at SWGM Podcast. Follow us, like, subscribe, share on the YouTube channel. Shut up, Dave. Savage World YouTube/Savage World's GM Podcast, and subscribe on iTunes, Savage World's GM Podcast. Tonight's show, Urban Fantasy, aka Fayhard. We're going to be talking about Urban Fantasy running at Savage Worlds. Here to join us, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello. You almost had it, man.
Almost. Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
You know, that script is so difficult because it changes every single week.
No, I'm starstruck by our special guest host, Scott. Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Horseshoes and hand grenades, my friend. Horseshoes and hand grenades.
And back by popular demand to Seagull manage everything, fly in, shit all over everything, and fly off. Scott W. Disembell.
I'm very agreeable.
So if you're watching the live stream, you poor bastards, feel free to participate in the chat. We do bring that into the show. Dustin, you want to shout out to our newest Patreon?
So we have a new Patreon. Thank you so much for your pledge. That would be Carrie Harrison. Thanks for coming along.
So, Urban Fantasy. Let's start by doing what every podcast does and gets it incredibly wrong. Let's define it. Let's start by defining what Urban Fantasy is.
Shadowrun.
Oh, good choice.
Oh, wow. We're going to get some hate mail now.
No, he's not like he's wrong.
Netflix's Bright would be a good example of an urban fantasy.
Wait, what? Light Bright?
Light Bright.
No, Netflix Bright.
Netflix.
You know, because
yeah.
everybody needs some Will Smith going, oh, hell no, in their life, right?
Right. That's what makes it urban fantasy. You think it's the orcs and the fairies. No. What makes it urban fantasy is Will Smith is in it.
Yeah, it's close to my urban fantasy. Like, there's this one chick on 42nd Street, right? And then if you get just... Oh, it's not that kind of... My bad. Magic.
So there's some definitions about it. The Dresden Files is another example of urban fantasy. I think what you're going to find is most urban fantasy in literature, at least in literature as it goes for books, comic books, things like that, is going to focus on the detective dealing with magic. Or the hidden world of magic in the modern era.
Deadlands Noir, right? That's urban fantasy.
Yep. So Dresden.
We said Dresden. God damn it.
God damn, wake up, Chris. Jesus
Christ, man. What your bullshit production is this?
One of the interesting things of this is that whenever we talk about this, we always overlook like some of the kind of classic gamer urban fantasies where you've got like Lankmar was absolutely urban fantasy. Obviously, most of the stuff written in the Forgotten Realms, you had Waterdeep and Ninja Barazan, where the entire supplement happens in the city, and a lot of that is classic urban fantasy, but no one thinks of it because it's just also fantasy. But as urban fantasy, despite the fact that it absolutely functions differently than the I'm going to go dungeon delving. When it's I'm delving in the fucking tavern and then in the Thieves Guild and stuff like that.
Go ahead.
I was to say, I mean, like Eberron, that's a classic example. It can be your vanilla, boring ass fantasy world, or you can just stay in the city of Sharn and have 1,001 nights of adventure and shit. That's all urban based.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, even though it tends to fall more in the horror camp, Deadlands itself is an urban fantasy. It's just having to take place in the world of the Wild West, right?
Yeah. What about ETU, right?
Oh yeah, ETU.
ETU. Amazingly urban fantasy, and I actually just saw somebody who recently posted up that Jamie Pearson had kind of sort of talked them into playing other games, and they said
know who that is.
No matter what they played, they always went back to Savage Worlds because of ETU.
But Jamie said that?
No, this other person who was lured away by Jamie and his horrific ideas on playing other games.
Oh, you mean Jamie?
Got that Genesis, son.
You mean Jamie Pearson, the heretic?
I don't know who that.
That's what we're talking about, right? He's officially become the heretic.
Jamie Peterson.
Yeah, Pearson.
Nice.
I'm doing the Savage Daddy thing where I don't get names right.
That's a true statement.
It's my thing. It's my thing.
That is a true statement.
I have a disability. God damn it! I deserve respect.
Yeah, old age. All right, so have we defined urban fantasy? I mean, everyone kind of gets it. It's like super popular right now, right? If you go to RPG now and shit, or even Kickstarter, there's tons of urban. I've backed like 4 or 5 urban fantasy settings.
Yeah, there was a bit of a drought for it for the last like 5-10 years.
Yeah, well, it's because most people probably play it poorly, like they do everything else. But I mean, so time will tell.
I mean, you've also got to consider whether or not it's run poorly, because one of the major differences in like a regular fantasy and an urban fantasy, there are guards, there are policemen, there are witnesses to crimes.
Yeah.
So you can't just run around killing whatever shows up in front of you. I mean, it's not even a good idea to have your weapons out and just walking around, because people are going to ask questions. The guards are going to stop you. Things are going to happen in a city. People are crammed in together.
Well, there's also this how you go about approaching it, whether magic is a hidden thing that's recently re-entered the world and it's part of a subculture, a la World of Darkness, Vampire the Masquerade,
Very mysterious.
being the veiled magic in a modern era, or where magic is widely common and acceptable, where you have witches casting spells from their tablets and internet devices.
Yeah,
like you can argue Eberron. You can argue Eberron. It's just replace industrialization with magic, and there you go.
God damn it! How dare you? Yeah, I mean, yeah, more or less. Yeah, Marchlands. I think. Yeah, Marchlands for Savage Worlds is like it's an interesting setting, but it's very much urban fantasy. You get to play fairies and satyrs and goat fuckers and whatever else people put in their urban fantasy.
Wait.
I guess I have to ask, because I'm not a fan of it. What about Rifts?
Rifts is post-apocalyptic.
Yeah.
Rifts is. You could argue that it could be depending, but no. It's superheroes in the post-apocalypse.
Dave's a motherfucker because I'm gonna be very nice. I'm just gonna sit here.
What I'm looking at right here, this says urban fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy in which the narrative has an urban setting. That's what it says.
Well, it's very, very much the clinical approach too. It's like, well, how do you define horror? Oh, well, it's really, because you can have horror in anything. Is it supernatural horror?
Right.
Is it psychological horror? Is it
Fuck, Call of Cthulhu is urban fantasy by that Wikipedia definition.
Yeah.
It actually probably would be, but Call of Cthulhu, a lot of it will take place in cityscapes, but it's cosmic in nature, so it goes way beyond just cities. Like, it goes beyond the urban constraint. I think that how people are using it in common pop lingo nowadays is that they're referring to fantasy overlaid a modern setting. The fantasy genre on top of something modern.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, that's what TV Tropes says.
Yeah. I'm sorry, TV Tropes. I stand corrected. I mean, Hellboy 2 is a really good example if you want to really fuck around with like how to model your urban fantasy sort of for that modern setting. Because when they go like the Goblin Market and all that shit, and they have to pierce the veil, and there's all this weird shit going on. Those are really good example in addition to Dresden Files. Was it one season, I think, which is back on Netflix or Amazon Prime, one of the two. They got the rights back. If you're lazy and don't want to read the billion-page books.
The 12 books that are out are 13.
Yeah, I don't have time. Jamie's talking all kinds of weird shit in the chat room. How much he likes Savage Worlds. He prefers it over Genesis. It's fucking crazy. He is. I mean, chat can't lie. He can't go back and delete what he said. He said Savage Worlds is the best system from urban fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, who can argue?
Anyway, so Dave doesn't like urban fantasy. Chris, do you like have you played urban fantasy, Chris?
I said I don't like Rifts, but I was thinking you guys should decide if that was urban fantasy.
Can we roll the tape back? I'm pretty sure.
I've actually played some Shadowrun, and I didn't like the system. And not so much I didn't like urban fantasy. I didn't like the system. I thought the book was poorly written, and I didn't care for the system itself.
No, Shadowrun's hot garbage, and I'm sorry if we're gonna lose listeners and viewers, but that's the truth. You're gonna have to reconcile that with your fucking conscience. So, have you ever played? So, there's a lot of good Shadowrun conversions, right? For what's the game you guys play? Savage Worlds. Oh man, I'm old and tired. Have you done any? You never played it through the conversions for Savage Worlds? No, it actually works really well.
Manuel Sams was actually a guest on here a while back, and he's been working on a conversion. It's pretty good.
Yes, yeah, he has probably one of the best conversions out there for it.
I would say he has one of the most complete conversions out there.
Here we go, being pedantic.
Well, no, I just don't think anyone's nailed actually bringing it to Savage Worlds because everyone's trying to replicate some of the mechanics from, it suffers a lot from the interface zero syndrome, where it's trying to capture what that other system did in Savage Worlds. And I think that's the big issue with a lot of the stuff that's trying to do Shadowrun, because Shadowrun's only existed in that one system, and everyone thinks the system basically runs like garbage, so everyone's trying to capture the one or two things they enjoyed in whatever they want to play.
And what do we know about Savage Worlds and trying to bring other games into it? What's the big key?
It does a great job at one-for-one conversions of mechanics.
Exactly. Convert. Make a one-to-one conversion, because Savage Worlds, it'll work brilliantly.
Yeah, the last thing you want to do is adapt it.
It's pulp.
It does only do pulp.
Right, that one does pulp. Well, and obviously your characters are all going to be the same in your Shadowrun game that you convert over to Savage Worlds. I mean, they're all going to be...
God, this is like a shit-talking episode. I'm so sorry. I really am.
Anyone who signed in and saw that you were on the show immediately knew what they were going to get, though.
The fuck does that mean?
It means you are the shitlord of the podcast.
I am. I can't help it, though, man. I got to call shit out when I see it. Like Jamie's love for fucking Savage Worlds ETU combination. I get it. So have I played Urban Fantasy? I'm a grown ass man, so I don't think I have. I can't really think. I mean, Shadowrun obviously, but like the real Urban Fantasy, right? Like the fruity warlocks and making love to mermaids and all that shit. No, I've never done the Monster Heart style game at all. Mostly because I think it seems like people try to, unless you're the hard-boiled noir side of Urban Fantasy, right? It's like these two extremes. It seems like it's either hard-boiled noir with Urban Fantasy, or, fucking Dracula's daughter, and we're teenagers in high school in love, and no one knows we're monsters, right? That kind of shit. It's like this wide spectrum, it seems like, and I don't know if there's a wildly popular comfortable middle.
So like everything's what the modern, and I'm drawing a complete blank here. Sparkling Vampires. What's the name of that series?
Twilight.
So,
I mean, I know that. Google
there are no vampires in Twilight, only sparkle fairies.
Like, I don't know what you're talking about. He clearly sucked.
Podcast has reached a new level. Derek just referenced fucking Twilight. No. I mean, let's rein it in, folks. It's one thing to be shit talkers. It's another to say that Twilight is the standard for what our games should be. God damn.
No, but it definitely qualifies. What Scott is saying is you have this severe pendulum swing when it comes to what people accept as urban fantasy.
You've got Vampire the Masquerade, which, I mean, is pretty much like a sexual harassment lawsuit waiting to happen.
Only for the LARPs. Only for the
LARPs.
And the furries.
Yeah, I mean, that's Werewolf, the Ascension. Not gonna bash them. They seem like fun games, but I mean, like maybe sometimes you need to give people a psych test before you let them into the LARP, because there's some things you just can't do in public.
No, I don't think. But here's the thing, too. I don't think that a lot of urban fantasy in gaming, at least, brings in the Fae aspect of the urban fantasy. It's always the classic vampire, werewolf, monster, or like Scott was saying, the hard boiled noir detective hunting down the vampire, werewolf, monster. Hidden underground masquerade.
And I've noticed this whenever you put forward the idea of, hey, I'm going to run this thing, and it's modern day, or it's 15 minutes in the future or whatever, but I'm going to include, goblins and elves and magic.
Yeah.
It's like this glaze goes over people's eyes, and they don't even have any time for it. They're like, no, if it's sci-fi, I want goddamn aliens. If it's fantasy, it's set in medieval Europe. It's like those are the only two things they're willing to accept.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that we see so much kind of pushback on urban fantasy, that it has to come in through the horror doorway, or it has to come in through, you know, the comic book superheroes in a post-apocalyptic world rifts area, or okay, we're going to do cyberpunk, and then we're going to add elves and stuff for Shadowrun. If you look at each one of these examples that we've actually listed off, each one is actually not urban fantasy as its core. It's urban fantasy that is also doing horror or sci-fi or, you know, post-apocalyptic or whatever.
That's
Right,
kind of interesting.
Right, but then you get, and I agree, Dave. You get that hate from the tabletop gamers of no, don't put your peanut butter in my goddamn chocolate. I want traditional fantasy gaming to be traditional fantasy gaming, and then blah blah. Oh, Netflix Bright is a genius. How do I do that in Savage Worlds? Because then something comes along that shows it, and people are all hopping on the bandwagon of, oh god, I've got to convert Bright to Savage Worlds and run that game.
I think like we've gotten to this point where pure genre adherence has been done. I mean, Scott, you've said it in previous ones. Like everybody that plays fantasy, everybody just makes Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. So here's I know we're on urban fantasy, but sorry, excuse me. With that, like the game I designed, we chose to only sprinkle in a little bit of lore, right? Just to sort of like, hey, here's kind of some words and shit and how we would do things. The biggest request that I have is more lore. Like they want me to design a world book for this stuff, and I'm just like, the whole point of the game is for you to take it, make it your own. But this is like this. Everyone wants that work done for them, and that kind of goes to what you were saying, Dustin. And what Jared was saying is like, until someone sees something, they don't want it. Like I got into a pretty big fucking argument with some dudes who were discussing, well, how do you make social conflicts interesting, right? So how would you make urban fantasy interesting, right? So we'll keep on the show theme, and all of us here would be, okay, cool. Well, the book already has everything you need. You just fucking dictate that it's urban fantasy, it's a modern setting, and here's some things I'm going to put into it. But there are people, and there are 4 or 5 dudes who were like viscerally pissed that I told them, you don't need a fucking company to tell you what to do. And they're like, well, that's why I buy the products. And it's like, why do you want a company to make you give them $30 to $40 fucking dollars for a book? And all you got to do is do it yourself. Make up all the shit. It's Earth. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Because they've been trained for the last 40 years by TSR, followed by WotC.
Yeah.
That's what they need from a company, is to be spoon-fed every little nuance to the point that the same rule gets a new name and a new coat of paint in every edition and every splat book and so on and so forth.
But I need equipment gear list that has a Kopesh, Dave.
I fucking hate you so much. It's just a goddamn sword. So that's the question is, because I mean, I think we all know the answer is, yeah, I could pick up Savage World. I could pick up the damn core book right now, and we could do an urban fantasy game in 30 minutes, right?
Oh yeah, well the dwarf, elf, and everything you need is already in the core book.
Yeah.
Easy as fuck.
The half folk.
Oh yeah, right. Make them fairy. They're fairies now. That's the half folk, right?
Well, and I don't want to talk, you know, out of turn about a licensee, but I remember there was a Kickstarter a couple years ago that, at least, you know, behind closed doors, when we all discussed it, we were like, yeah, that's a great idea, except I don't need your book to do it.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Your Kickstarter to be able to run that, because that's just take this fantasy myth and add it to basic Savage Worlds as a trapping and run with it. And I think that's one of those things that differentiates the people who've been kind of drinking the Savage Worlds Kool-Aid for 10 years and the people who are brand new converts who want everything spoon-fed to them. They want a book to lay everything out. The people who've been playing for 10 years already know how to trap that shit and do it with a core book.
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to, we have this issue of a lack of imagination or a fear of innovation, and people are worried that if they go out there and they do something, they're like, this will suck. And I'm just like, everything sucks until you spin it right. I mean, let's be honest. The Flintstones, can you pitch that? A guy rides a dinosaur to work. Okay, so maybe it does sell itself.
No, it's the dumbest shit ever, right? And it's true. Okay, we're gonna make a space opera. Okay, cool, you got me. It's a bunch of refugees from a planet that was destroyed by mutants who follow them to Earth, and now they have to survive on our planet. But on our planet, they unlock this. They discover this ancient evil wizard who's out to get them. All right, hey, you got us, and they're cats.
Yep.
Right, and you're like, get the fuck out of my office right now.
Yeah. Right.
And boom, here we are. It's a fucking, a beloved franchise. Well, it was a beloved franchise.
Right. They've destroyed it.
Fuck yeah, let's not get into that.
I wonder what you could be talking about.
God damn, I'm sorry. That was a bad example. Jesus.
Okay, how about, let me pitch this to you. The sidekicks of popular superheroes.
Yeah, I know where you're going. That breaks my heart.
Oh, gosh. Like, pretty much everything that we love that sounds stupid, that's done right, somebody comes along and does it wrong.
Yeah, so I'll say this, and I said this. I was in an interview talking about like the impetus for designing the game and all that jazz, and why I basically got off my ass after years of doing it. And I'll tell this for anyone watching, and if you do listen to this or whatever, if there is, regardless of your personal politics, go to YouTube and look for a video that you can look for it under "Eat Your Ashes." Okay, and it's like a 3-minute video, and it's by Max Landis, whom personally I love. Don't care what he's accused of. I think Max Landis is hyper creative. He's just maybe not his movies. I do like his movies, but it's a 3-minute video of Max Landis saying, "Look, you have all these cool ideas, right, for urban fantasy or whatever you're gonna do, and you got to take those ideas and put it out there." And then let everyone rip them to shreds, and then devour those fucking ashes, and then rebirth them into a next idea, and do that, and do that, and do that. And the whole time he's doing this, he's walking through the movie studio a lot. And his whole point is, until you can do that, and then he turns around, he's on a sound stage, he says, you will never get to fucking here, right? And it's the same thing in gaming. Until you're not going to hit your magnum opus, until you can just get comfortable and just let people tear your shit apart. It's terrifying. I get it. Especially gamers, geeks are usually high intellect, and the higher your intellect is, the more ego you have about your fucking self, and the more walls you want to put up. But who cares, right? We're also human beings. We're sitting talking about fucking make-believe elves and shit. And the people around your table are talking about make-believe elves. We are the fucking lamest of the lame to regular society, right? But to us, they're also the fucking lamest of the lame. They talk about fantasy football. At work, they stopped talking about fantasy football around me because they'd started up. And they just know that I don't give a shit about it. And so I'd be like, oh, cool. So how did your quarterback level up? Did he have like new magic shoes, +1 of running? Or was it the defensive line had a +10 to their defensive bonus? And they're just like, go fuck yourself. And it's the same shit, right? But yeah, I encourage everyone to look that video up and watch Eat Your Ashes. I do it every once in a while to rekindle my creative gene.
There was a video I watched years ago along the same lines that basically said, the key to success is learning to fail faster.
Yes.
The faster you can churn that stuff back out, the more likely you are to have the one that doesn't finally fail.
Absolutely.
All those lessons and are able to drop out, something amazing. And honestly, I think that's kind of where, as gamers, we need to look at things like Bright as the failure it truly was. It was not great storytelling. It didn't really tie anything new together. It didn't add anything new to the urban fantasy genre, but it's another iteration of failure that leads to us finally getting, the magnum opus to urban fantasy that makes it an open genre, rather than being that step-headed red child that nobody will talk about.
Yeah, it's true.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what does everyone want to see in urban fantasy, right? We kind of talked about it, but we don't have a lot of experience with it. I don't think it's anyone's wheelhouse on the show, right?
No, not by any stretch of the imagination.
So if you had to do it, or you had to run it, like say urban fantasy is now the D&D of games, right? If you don't play D&D, you're not getting any gamers. So what would you do? How would you run it? Would you set it in the 30s, the 40s, the future, modern?
There's a couple ways you could do it. I mean, you could have some fun with genre twists and genre mashings by doing it as a Western. You could do it as a medieval. You could do it like during the Renaissance period, or play on some other tropes. Absolutely, I think what is going to work, what'll work best. You really have to decide whether what the key creation point is. Is this a fantasy, historical fantasy culture that's evolved naturally to its current point? Is this the Lord of the Rings? Fast forward a millennia, and now we have cars and Sauron and all that stuff. Or is this a situation where some massive magical thing has happened and broken down rifts, and now magical creatures are flooding in? Is it a new thing that the world's learning to deal with, or is it something that's always been there? I think you kind of have to make that decision point when you're going to talk about it. And then if you're going to run it, you need to really decide, is it hidden or is it common? And I think the more interesting story is it's everywhere. It's pervasive. I think it's the more interesting story.
So like the Eberron thing, right?
Yeah, where it's just pervasive. But then maybe there's something wrong. Maybe there's a Dark Lord prophecy that's going to become fulfilled, and we're looking at it, watching it, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that's how I would go about running an urban fantasy. I would actually evolve it naturally through the course of the existing world. Kind of do a little bit of world building, bring it, what did the world of magic look like medieval? And then what did it look like during the Renaissance period? What does it look like during the imperial period of colonization? Is it on Earth, or is it something very, very similar? Yeah. And run it from there.
Well, I mean,
that's what I would do.
That's what John Campbell did for sci-fi in the 30s and 40s as he broke us out of the pulp era into the proper like detective noir era that came after that, was because he basically said, no, we're going to root this in science. The science fiction is everywhere. You don't make the laser gun the center of how awesome your story is. You make the laser gun so common to everyone that your reader thinks that world is amazing, not that the laser gun is amazing, because the world must be amazing if a laser gun is common. And that was a big aspect of what John Campbell did to transform science fiction. I think that's kind of what needs to be done to a certain extent to make urban fantasy break that mold, because if you look at the ones that have been successful up till now, it's ETU, it's Dresden Files. I even did one that I called Piercing the Veil, where it was literally just that. You had a group of people who were being sent out to these little things where something broke through, and they were like the paranormal investigation group, X-Files bullshit.
Right. And that kind of trope has really been done to death and driven into the ground, which is why I would choose something that just evolves naturally. I would say also too is like just to avoid some of the tropes, avoid the big genre hookup tropes that everybody's seen. Do something different with urban fantasy. I think there's this big for example, oh my god, Altered Carbon is the greatest fucking thing ever. That Netflix series is fucking incredible. Whoever came up with that idea is a genius. Yeah, that shit's been around since the 60s.
It's been around since William Gibson.
Yeah, hidden in things called books.
I've heard of them.
Wait, what? What are those?
So I mean, the whole Altered Carbon is nothing new. It's actually based on a sci-fi novel,
and the book is vastly different than that fucking show. So
yeah,
wow.
So people. I don't think the average gamer, the average role player, is so much a product of the zeitgeist. They're not aware of things that don't pop up in their field of view. So, I mean, you want to do something interesting with urban fantasy? Go read some Asimov novels.
Mm-hmm.
Go read some Asimov novels, or
read iRobot.
Yeah, read the iRobot stuff and bring that awesome. In. And replace robots with elves.
Exactly, right? That's what I was thinking. Like, if you do Blade Runner, take Blade Runner, move it into the modern era, and everything tech, make it magic. Like the replicants are some kind of race of doppelgangers, except they can't shift because of some reason that's in their that's in their DNA now, or they're enchanted that way. I mean, there's a lot you can do if you just move shit back.
Or they're just golems.
Yeah, they're just golems.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool as fuck, right?
Or you trap magic the same way you would trap our current energy crisis.
Oh,
something like that. Say, hey, magic was this great thing that was everywhere, and now we've just abused the shit out of it. And it's destroying our atmosphere. It's destabilizing planes.
I've got one for you. Magic is on a cycle, and society has become so dependent on it. It's the energy source that powers everything. and in a certain amount of time, it's going to cycle out, and society is going to collapse.
Yeah, go reverse Shadowrun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's, instead of an awakening, there's like a great slumber coming, and then we could put it in California and have a great earthquake, and then with all these canyons, and we'll turn it into like green rock or blue. Oh, no, wait, that sounds familiar. My bad. No, those are cool ideas, though, right? Because I do like the idea of kind of like Jared said, flip it on its head and move in a different direction. And like the more you use, oh man, fuck, you gave me a really good idea for like counters at a table. Oh fuck, like every time you use magic or you encounter magic or do something with magic, you have to get rid of a fucking, not a Benny, but essentially a token on the table, right? Well, there's a finite number of those fuckers. And oh god, man, hold on, I had to write some shit down. That's a really good idea. God damn.
So Orson's got card.
Power points is what it is, Scott.
Yeah. Right. Oh, dude, go ahead, man. Now I'm just all fucking. I'm excited.
See, and that's the thing is, all it takes is that little bit of a spark in the mind of somebody who can run with it to create something that would be awesome. But you have to be able to break the scale.
You got to find players.
Exactly. You got to be able to break the scale and take it from it's a great idea in your head, it's a great idea on paper, to it actually plays well, and then it gets an audience. And that's the reason why, what we're seeing is it hasn't happened yet. And I honestly, and I've had this conversation with Jared off camera before, is I think the best version of that is one that does grow out of the world has been magical for a millennia or more. And it's that proper, evolution from true what we think of as, Western fantasy. And then, well, what would happen? What happens when the orcs start World War I by killing the elven prince?
Racist.
So,
yeah, why's it got to be the orcs? Everybody's always shitting on the orcs.
Happy Jack setting.
What if it's the elves who turned all Hitler?
Yeah. Hey, there was a cartoon I saw once where the elves were jackbooted Nazis, and it was actually a really good comic.
No, like in the lore, the elves are the one that creates the orcs. Like if you get into the Silmarillion, that's where the orcs come from. The elves are like, hey, let's.
Well, fucker, there you go. You went back to Tolkien. God damn it.
First off, Dustin, Silmarillion is some kind of fucked up dinosaur.
I think you're referring to the Silmarillion.
Right.
So many Tolkien nerds are going to be fucking
no.
Please address all hate mail.
So that is a very small prehistoric creature that smokes a pipe and has a weird waddle.
Yeah, the intro is please kill me now. Oh, but
I mean, here's the thing. And you can say, okay, well, we're talking about, you just ripped off Asimov's Robot trilogy. Yeah. And I called it elves,
right?
Or manufactured humans.
I called it
some kind of magical race, whatever.
Yeah, doppelganger Eke.
Right, of course I did. And the whole point of the Asimov's iRobot is not about cool stories about robots. It's always an exploration of how humans treat other humans.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a subtext to all that storyline, and you just put different trapping coats of paint on shit. Yeah. Now it's not the Nazis, it's the orcs. We hate them. Boo.
Yeah. So here's a question, right? And we talked about this a couple of times. We joked about it, and we just got to it. Is that urban fantasy is ubiquitous, right now, specifically. Mm-hmm. But where are the fucking players? You know what I'm saying? Like, I've tried running, like I did offer to run Blades in the Dark, which is urban fantasy, actually. It's just, 1800s. It's like Dishonored, the video game. And everyone wanted to jump on that, but like other shit, it's just crickets, right? We talked about that. So how is this shit so fucking popular? Or is it just maybe we're not running in the right circles? I don't know.
I really think that the aesthetic is popular, but the activity is not so much. I really hate to say this, but I've noticed, and I'm sorry, I'm gonna piss off the millennials at this point, but so Generation X and further back like to do stuff and then think about how it looked beforehand, and then it seems like the millennials are like, this will make a really cool picture.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. Please address all hate mail.
It's not shitting on it. It's a generation that was raised on instant gratification.
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
that's kind of what it is.
and there's and there really is this whole issue of what is the aesthetic of this? Is how does this look? Like steampunk as a concept is very Victorian era defiance, but as it's implemented on the internet, it's like, let's put some gears and wear some corsets. Cyberpunk, as it was created, was, all right, corporations have taken over everything and they are stripping us of our humanity, and we have to turn into half machines in order to exist. You know, let's buck the system and destroy it through the net. And it became, in an aesthetic, cyborg superheroes. That's where we're at. It's like urban fantasy is popular because of the aesthetics, the look of it. But when we're trying to get people to play the game, we're having to go to older generations.
Well, I think it's this thing in gaming too, and I'm going to say this in gaming. It kind of happens on the video gaming level, but it's even more. I don't want to use the word because the word's going to have a negative connotation, but fuck it, retarded. It's more retarded. It's more retarded at the tabletop level, and it's this conceit of, hey, we want something new, except we don't like change. So, hey, where's the cool shit with flying robots and guns and lasers? Oh, there's 17 books. No, fuck you. I'm going to play D&D.
Well,
there's a little bit of we want it, but we don't really want it. And I think a lot of that's driven by what's popular in media. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say, Art Fernandez, one of our patrons, actually says in chat, you know, most gamers play to escape the real world. Urban fantasy reminds them of the world too much, so they don't want to play it. And I think there's an absolute level of truth to that.
Sure.
In that when you sit down, you start talking to gamers about what they want to play, they want to be the power fantasy character set in, you know, medieval Europe. And I mean, you want to talk about an idealized version of medieval Europe. Nobody in a fantasy game has shit all over them. Nobody in a fantasy game just walked out of the field where they were, you know, tilling the beets that they're going to eat for the year. But it's always where we set our games, or it's the high-flung future where somehow we are standing our own 2 feet at war with other races who got to space long before us and have giant fucking empires, and our one little planet came out there and was like, aha, bitches, we're human. You can't stop us. Like, are you fucking shitting me? These are the fantasies that we engage in as gamers and that we get fed. I mean, look at all the TV, look at all of the movies, look at all the books. Even now, we're talking about, like, we'll take Asimov's sci-fi and make it fantasy. Name a really good urban fantasy book that's not something else twisted into it. You know, we repeatedly talk about Dresden Files, but again, that's more the horror side. You know, it's that horror behind a veil, and we're calling it urban fantasy because it kind of has some magic elements to it, but it's not really urban fantasy.
Okay, I'm about to blow everybody's mind. Anybody who gets this reference is at least probably in their late 40s. Dresden Files is Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Absolutely.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, just with magic, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Except not done as well. Sorry, I can't. It's true. It's true, right?
Yeah. There's you know, it's the old King Solomon line, biblical line. There's nothing new under the sun.
No, true statement. Right? Everything is a repeat of a repeat of a repeat. And art is correct. Mm-hmm. You know, it's just like, yeah, most people, and I have heard that a lot from folks, is like, oh, I'd rather just, you know, do the fantasy thing because it's an escape from the real world. So I will say this, though. I know I said this before, and I'll say this again. If you believe that fucking D&D and fantasy fucking role-playing is medieval Europe, unless specifically a setting like Lion and Shield or whatever, stop. It's not. It's the American Old West. D&D is the American Old West. Stop fucking kidding yourselves. There's no fucking feudal lords in your goddamn D&D game. None of that shit is present. There's nothing. There's nothing ubiquitous about D&D that says it's fucking Europe. It is the American West. God damn it. Respect America. Respect the West and for what it stood for. God damn.
It's the American West from the 1960s TV shows about the West.
Yes, it's a fucking spaghetti Western. It is literally urban fucking fantasy. It's a fucking spaghetti Western with wizards and orcs. Jesus God in heaven. Stop saying it's medieval Europe. It drives me fucking insane.
Well, and here's the thing too. I understand completely what Art is saying, and I can see that conceit of people play games for escapist quality. I'm gonna say this though. I got 5 sick motherfuckers who show up every Friday to be tortured.
So it's a thing, right?
They're not looking for a fantasy escape. They're looking to like, oh God, I want to see how long I can survive in this horrific world.
Look at God, I hate doing this because people say this shit all the time, but your game, right, is the Dead Soul or the Dark Souls of the RPG, right? Dark Souls, Demon Souls, incredibly difficult. You fucking die. It's the roguelike, right? And that's a very popular genre of game, and I think you may have hit on that fucking nerve with the game you run.
Yeah, it's survival horror. That's what we're playing, and you attract a certain type of audience for that. I agree. The mainstream audience is the D&D hero wish fulfillment fantasy. Yeah. I want to be uber powerful. I want to win every encounter and walk off like a boss. I want to feel bad when I come to like a badass. I get it, and I agree. That's probably the mainstream player. But I would say at the same time, don't discount there is an audience out there. Are they buying a lot of books? Probably not.
Well, you don't need them to buy books, right? Like I said, I offered to run Spirit of 77. If you've never fucking read or played Spirit of 77, you are fucking missing out on one of the best times I've ever had at the game table.
70s genre roleplay?
Bro, yeah, it's probably Apocalypse. I mean, I showed up, I wore you're the DJ, right? But I was dressed like a fucking police captain. I had my shoulder holster on, shirt all untucked, and the table was playing different characters. And it's just a high energy, and so it fits me well. I'm like, all right, you jive hunky motherfuckers, what's next? And then it's just instantaneous into their characters. I offered to run that for a random group of folks, and it was just like, we're gonna go play Curse of Strahd. Get the fuck out of here with this Curse of Strahd bullshit. You know what happens? He's a vampire, and you're gonna hunt him and you're gonna meet some gypsies, and you're gonna fucking murder the vampire. Oh, and it's gonna make it different because I'm gonna use a fucking a fake tarot deck to spread out the lore and the items. Fuck out of here with that fucking bullshit. So a goddamn D&D adventure from fucking 40 years ago, rewritten, and they repackaged it, and they flat.
No. Here's an idea for urban fantasy: make Strahd a pimp.
Oh, dude. Hey, you know what? Actually, hold on. I got a
really good idea. Scott's got to write that one down too. Scott, get it.
Oh man, I'm pulling up Google Maps of Druid Hill in Baltimore and thinking where I could throw fucking Strahd's lair. Oh, yes,
the Pimp Castle.
Oh man! Hey, any listeners want to hop on Roll20?
So I think interestingly though, one place that you can pretty much guarantee you would have a audience for this is at a con. If you run a game at a con, people are a lot more willing to play outside their normal comfort zone. They're not looking for a weekly game; they're looking for a one-time, one-off experience. And I think urban fantasy has this ability to be really freaking fun for that one-off, but people won't admit to themselves that it might be fun to do week. Although, I mean, is it anything more than like Monster Hunt of the Week can be fun?
Right,
Supernatural role-playing. I did something like that at a con. I ran a game titled Disco Inferno. And it was all set back in the 70s. And I had all those characters. I had the pimp. I had the 70s cowboy. I had the roller girl. I had, I just had 7 characters that were very, very much into the 70s. And the whole thing was cliche, but a vampire opened a disco, and he was taking out the young girls and things like that, and making them, and all this shit was going on and it was in New York in the 70s. So I had a big thing happen in Central Park where they found a cave in Central Park and had to fight vampires and shit, and it was awesome.
Good, that sounds awesome.
But it was a con, it was a con game that was a one shot. So I kind of see where you're going with that, Dave. Is that you give it to them in a small bite-sized game.
But we're giving away all kinds of free trademarked items. So this podcast is copyright. I'm about to say some shit again. Motherfucking Charlie's Angels Urban Fantasy.
Yeah. Well,
that would be so much fun.
Here's a game too that is kind of horror, but really it's more urban fantasy thing else if you were to adapt it from a movie. Daybreakers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
With Ethan Hunt. It's the idea that fast forward, vampires have taken over the world. It's still in the high-tech setting in modern day, and now there's a blood shortage. There, go play that game. That's urban fantasy.
Yeah.
100% urban fantasy.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, that's kind of what you have to do. You have to say, well, what's this thing that you can assume would have gone wrong with the fantasy part? Because, let's be honest, the interesting stuff isn't the stuff that went right. It's always the stuff that went wrong. So you have to, okay, so vampires. Okay, vampires took over the world. Okay, Cthulhu. Well, Cthulhu fucking invaded everything, and it's right behind everything in modern life. That big corporation is really just a demon eating your souls through advertising clicks on the interwebs, and you don't know that every time you click on that pop-up, it's taking a little piece of your soul and locking it away. And that's why you can't go to bed at night without looking at your phone all night long. And now you've got players who have to go off and investigate why this great company that used to have "Don't be evil" as a slogan suddenly are devouring everyone's souls. You can take the what went wrong aspect and make any urban fantasy out of it, because you have to assume, what about modern life would have twisted that?
Yeah.
Yeah, good shit. God, I kind of want to run urban fantasy now. Fuck. All of a sudden, I'm like super pumped for this stupid fucking genre.
No, that's okay. Once the blood wine wears off, you go, what the fuck was I thinking?
I really have been drinking. Oh shit.
Yeah, see more urban fantasy. I've come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. I'm all out of bubblegum.
God, could you imagine that fucking game?
They
right
live.
where they live with fucking magic behind, doing demon sorcery and shit behind the fucking facades.
I ran a Deadlands Hell on Earth that was set in Manhattan. That was the combination of John Carpenter's filmography.
Awesome.
And Wall Street was They Live.
Nice.
They found a pair of sunshades, and when they looked at the stockbrokers through the sunshades, they realized they were all demons.
Nice. That's good shit, man. God, man, yeah. Oh, maybe I will run urban fantasy.
I mean, to be fair, we've named a lot of different stuff. There is actually, again, an urban fantasy that does exist from a licensee, and that's Olympus Inc. I mean,
what? Oh, yeah, true. Olympus Inc. is good shit.
Runepunk is also urban fantasy.
Yeah,
You guys remember Runepunk?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of feel like that's more steampunk, though, don't you think?
I don't know.
Runepunk has an urban fantasy vibe to it because they tried to be a little steampunk with a little bit of Eberron, right? You get what I'm saying? Like, yeah, I mean, he's not wrong. You definitely.
Yeah, I can't say. I mean, I know about it, and it was Reality Blurs who put it out, Sean Preston, but I've never read it.
I know the art was terrible, and that will turn me off quick as fuck from your book. I can't help it. I'm a visual whore.
I think Art Fernandez makes a good point. The Purge, but with magic. Just
Dude,
the Purge movie series, but with magic.
It was They Live.
Yep.
Dude, the Purge with magic could be interesting. Because there's a Star Trek episode where the town used to go batshit crazy at a certain time of the day. And, there's a lot of things you could do with that. Oh, dude. God damn. I don't know. Maybe I want to run urban fantasy now.
And I mean, as to the why is urban fantasy kind of making this resurgence, I think you can honestly put your finger on it with things like Stranger Things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like that hits, that says, hey, we're going to take maybe not the modern world, obviously with Stranger Things that said it in the 80s, but it's this idea of the real world, and right behind everything is this thing that no one knows about. And that has hit so big and has such a huge audience that, you know, things like that and Bright bring that out, and now people are looking for something that they didn't know they wanted. I mean, to be fair, let's just look at Scott's reaction to most of this is like, oh, that's really cool. Oh, that's really cool. I can run with that. You know, that reaction is what a lot of people are saying when they watch these shows and they consume that media. Yeah. The question is whether or not it's going to actually jump the shark, or if it's, you know, it's going to blow out here in a couple of years and everybody will be back playing fucking D&D.
No, well, anecdotally, yeah, I don't see anyone playing it. Honestly, I think people play D&D. Even fucking Stranger Things did nothing but pimp out D&D sales, right? The shit started skyrocketing, and that's where I forgot his real name. The RPG Pundit had that article that he wrote that everyone got all pissy about. It's like, if you watch actual plays but you don't play D&D, you are not a fucking gamer. Just because you mentally masturbate to the Critical Role people or to Chris Perkins' style of DMing, but you don't actually play RPGs, you're not a fucking gamer, right? So just because you watch Stranger Things, you may have bought a D&D book because you're a hipster fuck and you think you're cool. You're not a gamer, right? You're not.
Listen, I follow the Patriots religiously. That makes me the world's greatest quarterback, goddammit. Exactly, I watch them all the time.
Same shit. I can't believe he got shit for that statement. It seems like an obvious fucking truth. But again, it was the usual suspects on the evil hat and Apocalypse World shit who hate on him. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. So real quick, Stranger Things. Do you think that the younger generation, the millennials, right, love that? To them, that's a horror show, like horror, in the sense that they're watching a show about a bunch of kids that they can kind of identify with, right, mentally, but those kids don't have cell phones, right? So they have no way of like internet Googling shit. And I wonder if it's how in their brains this is like psychologically the most terrifying shit ever. It's just like, oh my god, I can't Google anything to get the answers.
Oh my god, they have to use walkie-talkies.
Yeah, right.
I think they're just like, oh wow, you have to talk to people, like you have to make friends in the real world, and they can judge you and see your fat rolls. Like,
I think
what is this talking to people thing?
I think the appeal, if you ask me, the appeal of millennials to watching a show like Stranger Things, I don't think the millennials are the driving focus and force behind that audience. No, I think that's a successful series because there are people that grew up in the 80s and it's so much nostalgia filter.
Yeah.
Oh God, yeah.
That's me.
But yeah.
I think that Stranger Things drew a portion of its audience on nostalgia, but it's held them and the millennials and everybody else because of the fact it actually does deliver a good story.
Yeah, I would say it's a good show.
The thing I think is maybe the missing piece here is I don't care how good your mechanics are for a urban fantasy. If you don't tell a good enough story that gamers want to relive it, it's not going to crack that. True. Well, we're just going to play fantasy, or we're just going to play that same thing we've played before. I mean, you know, Jeff Jones throws out, you know, what about Highlander? I mean, Highlander was obviously, you know, demigods or whatever fighting each other in a modern-esque world with fantasy trope weaponry. Well, I mean, that's pretty fucking urban fantasy. But I don't think I know anybody who wants to play Highlander at the game.
Okay, so hold on, because Jared's as old as I am. I don't think the rest of you are as old as we are. So, Jared, you and I both know, because we were playing D&D, right? Would have been
77, 78.
First edition, right? Mm-hmm. So, you and I both know that when Highlander hit the motherfucking theaters, within a week, there were all these motherfuckers. Wow, I'm gonna play this immortal character. Right? I mean, it was instantaneous.
Yep, and here's the other thing too. I think that urban fantasy, like the '80s, is coming back because if you look at a lot of movies and media from the '80s, a lot of urban fantasy stuff, really hackneyed and poorly done, but a lot of urban fantasy shit. You got to remember, He-Man, Masters of the Universe, big screen movie in the '80s, total urban fantasy. And if you take a look at Stranger Things, I'm gonna say this about Stranger Things. I enjoy the storytelling, but the creators of that show owe some royalty checks to Steven Spielberg and Goonies,
Yeah.
and Cthulhu,
And
H.P.
they-
Lovecraft's estate, because that's Cthulhu Goonies. That's all that shit is Cthulhu Goonies.
You're
They
jealous.
killed Mikey.
Yeah,
Like literally. Like
Whoa, spoilers.
I go there, man. I'm
Oh, we're talking
hardcore
about
like that. Okay, so like Bob is this guy you think you're gonna hate Bob. You're like, man, I'm gonna hate Bob. Bob's gonna be like a total a-hole douchebag. And then you're like, okay, Bob's cool. And then 5 minutes later, Bob's dead. And you're like, no, Mikey, no. I mean, not that shrill because it's in your head.
But I mean, that's what I'm wondering though with this resurgence is
I think it's nostalgia.
same thing that we went through when you guys are, Scott's here, you're talking about how everybody wanted to play the immortal sword swinging character as soon as Highlander came out, and then here we are years later, and no one wants to play that game.
No, yeah.
We're going to go through that same thing where it comes out, it's real popular in the moment, and then everyone's going to forget and go right back to the same thing they've always done because we're creatures of fucking habit, and that's what we do.
Of course. I mean, even sci-fi is pretend popular, right, in gaming.
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we should have a great sci-fi. No, you don't want a sci-fi setting. You don't.
You don't.
You don't.
Yeah.
No, and I think there's a lot of that with the tabletop role playing crowd. Is well, if only there was a good urban fantasy game, I'd play it. I'm not so certain you would.
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
The thing about it is that we gravitate towards what we know. And so when we go to the sci-fi games, everybody's like, oh, so do I play a Jedi or do I play a Vulcan?
So that's interesting you say that, right? So I had a conversation with a really good friend with the editor, my editor, saying that's the same shit we talked about. Is that we think that's what it is, right? What's easier? We all, as kids, pretended to be fucking sword fighters and Robin Hood and knights and pretend wizards and shit. And that's easy. That's like 4th grade level, basic bitch, pumpkin latte fucking level of fucking gaming. It is, right? The sci-fi, I have a hard time with sci-fi. Like I said, we found the show. If you tell me I'm playing sci-fi and I'm like, okay, cool, 2018, my computer or my phone can do anything I ask it to do pretty much. So now we're 300 years in the future. Well, those fucking computers must be amazing. I don't know what the problem is. I'm just going to ask the computer to fix the ship. I don't need a skill set, right? And it becomes more difficult. But you're right, Dustin. It's what we know, right? And then coupled to that fear of living in the modern world and being triggered by shit that you never really experienced, right? Because no orc ever fucking attacked you with a magic wand that was a phallic symbol and shit like that, right? So, I mean, it's crazy. I'm sorry, but yeah, you're right. I think everyone wants their pumpkin spice latte eventually, right? So we're in the summer months right now of gaming with all this new shit and urban fantasy, and I tell you what, yeah, Dave's right. Once the August of gaming hits, it's right back to pumpkin spice lot. Whenever the shit comes out, I'm not a white girl, so I know when it comes out.
Hey, jump on your Ugg boots.
Look, Karen.
Yeah, grab your selfie stick and get the fuck out of here. No, I agree. I think that things like Bright and Stranger Things, Harry Potter, are another kind of urban fantasy, kind of series of franchise. It's gaming has this very high school clique mentality, like, oh, what's the coolest, hottest thing? What are all the cool kids doing? Yeah. Oh, well, in the moment, the coolest thing is, oh, if you could do The Matrix as a role-playing game back when it was the biggest thing, that would be the greatest thing. Well, then you really, I bet you if you release one, it would crash and burn as far as a manageable product.
Yeah. So,
yeah, I think you get that. I think what you're going to do is the best. I think probably the best you can hope for is to bring urban fantasy into your established game group if that's what they want to do.
And it'd almost be like it's when you take a break, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
We're on a break.
Try a palate cleanser. Palate cleanser. Run a mini campaign as an urban fantasy.
That's the excuse I use now because really I don't know why. I love one shots. And gamers do not like the idea of one-shots, and I don't know why. I want to experience as many genres and systems as possible, even if they're not run like exceedingly well, right? But we still can get the idea out there of like, oh, this is cool because my idea, and like, oh, we really, really enjoy that, so let's get back to it. Well, I try to do that shit, and it is just go fuck yourself almost every time from the local area. It's just, it really is. And I know some folks in chat are talking about like who was it that said they ran a poll with their gaming group? Many Savage Worlds
podcast.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty cool. You know, their group wants to do something different. It'd be fun, you know, and be curious to see how long that lasts, though.
Well, I think you have this problem too. D&D fantasy as a genre is very well rooted. Everybody's very familiar with the idea of classes. What is a rogue? What is a wizard? What is a paladin?
Yep.
It is so ingrained and established that it's comfortable.
Yeah.
It's like a comfortable blanket. Oh, this is what I'm familiar with. I understand it completely. When we start going, hey, let's run an urban fantasy. Well, wait, what's your definition of urban fantasy? I don't know.
Right.
Wait, well, what is it? It's this, it's that, yes, and no, and some of that, yes, and some of the other. I don't know if I want to. I don't know.
So much work. Anything written down? Maybe you can read it anyway, bitch.
Right.
Don't kid yourself.
It's like, hey, you know, there's this great Thai place around the corner. You know,
right.
I'd like to try Thai, but I don't want to waste $8 and have, you know, I've heard bad things about Thai. It might be interesting.
Yeah.
You know what? No, I'm just gonna go to McDonald's because I know what I get when I go there.
Why? You're not bullshitting though. I take people when we you know travel overseas a lot, and I see people always wanting to go eat at fucking McDonald's, and I'm like, you are literally in a place you may never be again.
Mm-hmm.
You better put that horse dick in your mouth. You fucking try it.
Right?
God damn it! Stop going to Pizza Hut. It's gonna taste different anyway. You dipshit.
Yeah, it's that you know we tend to embrace what's familiar, and I think that happens really a lot more ingrained in the tabletop gaming hobby. We're just not really open to new ideas.
No,
like
we're different creatures of habit. Yeah, and we like to argue about how we're not creatures of habit, or how our habits are our minute differences in habit are so much better than the other.
Right. The way I do it rocks. The way you do it sucks.
Oh man, I only roll 2d6s. Your way is fucking inferior.
That's right.
Well, my dice are fucking pictoglyphs, you barbarians.
You're playing a game with hit points? You fucking barbarian. Oh, what do you mean you don't have a wound system, you goddamn hippie?
No, for real. For real. When I took away armor class out of the game I wrote, people were just like, wait, what? I was like, yeah, armor class is hot garbage. I've never believed in it. Have you ever watched any video I've ever been on? Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, I think we've beaten this dead horse sufficiently. I don't think, unless there's anything else in the chat that we want to bring up that we haven't discussed that is worth to mention.
It got really active all of a sudden. That was cool.
Yeah, we're talking about crazy kinders with machine guns and Nazi gnomes.
Nazi gnomes.
Disavow.
Absolutely.
Disavow. I disavow.
We're the interesting with this though. The P in RPG stands for plagiarize.
Oh, fucking fact.
That's why this is so popular right now. Is something hit that everyone wants to go play that thing. It'll be a great one shot for their group, and then they'll go back to D&D.
Look at Chris. What are you doing over there? Motherfucker, you're like 2 hours behind me.
Yeah, it's pumpkin time.
He's starting to fade.
Fading quick.
Yeah.
Hey, let me know if the prince gets the right glass slipper, bitch.
You need to turn around and take power from Jackie Chan.
Jackie Chan.
Ooh, not on camera though. That's a violation of YouTube.
Power, Jackie.
All right. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and shut it down. Until next time, this is Jared Savage, Daddy Gunning for Chris, Dave, Dustin, and Scott saying keep rolling, stay savage.